And if you will please read with me, I am open and receptive as I receive this message today. Something I am about to hear applies to my life. I am here by divine appointment to receive spiritual tools for my personal transformation and to help make the world a better place. My life's purpose is already within me, and I am committed to its unfoldment. As I hear truth today, I am set free, and so are you. Let's grow together, and let's welcome our beloved minister, Reverend Martin.
Shortly after tucking little 4-year-old Sammy into bed, his parents heard sobbing coming from his room. And rushing back in, his father found little Sammy crying hysterically, and he managed to tell Daddy that he had accidentally swallowed a penny and he was sure he was going to die. Well, no amount of talking seemed to calm him down, so in an attempt to help, his father secretly palmed a penny out of his pocket and pretended to pull it out of Sammy's ear. Now, Sammy was delighted, and in a flash, he snatched the penny from his father's hand, swallowed it, and said, "Do it again!" Well, today we celebrate Father's Day, a celebration that has a history born out of tragedy, one that serves as a reminder to cherish our fathers and the fathers in our lives. Grace Clayton of Fairmont, West Virginia, was the first person on record to petition for a Father's Day. In December 1907, a local mine explosion had killed more than 360 men, most of them fathers. The blast left about 1,000 children fatherless, a terrible loss for such a small town. And Grace asked the pastor of her local Methodist church to dedicate a day to honor fathers on July 5th, 1908, the Sunday closest to the birthday of her father. Well, the celebration didn't make much of an impact at the time, because as it happened that weekend of July 5th, one of their teenage members died, and shortly thereafter the church's floor collapsed. So the first Father's Day was overshadowed by these events. But things turned out a bit differently in Spokane, Washington, where another woman worked to start a Father's Day tradition. Sonora Smart Dodd heard a Mother's Day sermon at her church in 1909. It reminded her of her mother, who died in childbirth, leaving the father to raise 6 children alone. Ms. Dodd was inspired to honor her father and proposed the idea for a Father's Day celebration to local religious leaders. So it was that on June 19, 1910, pastors throughout the city delivered sermons honoring fathers, and news quickly spread around the country. President Calvin Coolidge supported the idea of a national holiday in 1924, but it wasn't until 1972, when Richard Nixon declared it a national holiday, that it became permanently established. Now, it's always seemed to me that Mother's Day is much easier than Father's Day, at least in terms of gift giving. For Mother's Day, a card and flowers usually do the trick, or perhaps taking mom out to a nice restaurant. But dads are harder to shop for, and there must be millions of fathers out there who've had to pretend that soap on a rope was just what they wanted. I read a child's definition of Father's Day. It's just like Mother's Day, only you don't spend as much. And I think that's probably true. In the old days of landline telephones, every year, Mother's Day was the busiest day for long-distance calls. And Father's Day was the busiest day of the year for collect long-distance calls. And there also seems to be an emotional difference between the 2 days. Seems a little easier to be sentimental about Mother's Day than Father's Day. Now, I grew up in perhaps just about the last generation in which fathers weren't supposed to be vulnerable, not supposed to be emotional. They were supposed to go to work and bring home a paycheck. And if they had problems, they were supposed to keep a lid on them. And that's probably why many fathers seem to be emotionally distant. The late Irma Bombeck, channeling her inner child, wrote this about her father. One morning, my father didn't get up and go to work. He went to the hospital and died the next day. I hadn't thought that much about him before. He was just someone who left and came home and seemed glad to see everyone at night. He opened the jar of pickles when no one else could. He was the only one in the house who wasn't afraid to go into the basement by himself. He cut himself shaving, but no one kissed it or got excited about it. And it was understood that when it rained, he got the car and brought it around to the door. When anyone was sick, he went out to get the prescription filled. He took lots of pictures, but he was never in them. Whenever I played house, my mother doll had a lot to do. I never knew what to do with the daddy doll, so I had him say, "I'm going off to work now," and threw him under the bed. The funeral was in our living room, and a lot of people came and brought all kinds of good food and cakes. We had never had such company before. I went to my room and felt under the bed for the daddy doll, and when I found him, I dusted him off and put him on my bed. He never did anything. I didn't know his leaving would hurt so much. Today we honor our fathers regardless of who they were or what they did. Some of our fathers were better at fatherhood than others, but you've got to figure that your father did the best he knew how to do, considering who he was and what he believed. And besides, we honor our fathers because otherwise we wouldn't be here. And today we especially honor God the Father. Now, we've heard the phrase God the Father so often that we don't always stop to think about what that phrase implies. But when Jesus spoke of a loving Father, he was voicing a revolutionary idea. If you work your way through the Hebrew Scriptures, often called the Old Testament, you'll see that very often God was thought of as a stern judge, jealous, frequently angry, vengeful, and tribal. Now, the Jews were spiritual pioneers inasmuch as they taught monotheism, which claims that there's only one God. But that God was for them alone. None other need apply. But Jesus' consciousness had no room for a distant God, a superior court judge in the sky just waiting to penalize our every mistake. His concept of God as the Father supplied the foundation for several universal truths. First, if God is the Father of all, then we all share the same DNA. As the ancient mystics said, "I am that which thou art, and thou art that which I am." In moments of illumination, we realize that we're connected to God, inseparable from Him, and that we are that which He is. And by the way, God has no exclusive gender, so I generally avoid using male pronouns when referring to God. But this is Father's Day, so just for today, God's pronouns are He and Him. So, again, when we realize that we're connected to Him, inseparable from Him, and that we are that which He is, then we are empowered to say, "I am that which thou art. Now, God is the essence and energy of all creation. The Bible, science, and the great philosophies from many traditions agree that God is the source of all that is. In quantum physics, this is known as the unified field, an active intelligence which holds all existence together. Some physicists, like Max Planck, called this field the divine matrix. And Deepak Chopra describes it this way: God creates and nourishes everything from a tree to the movement of the stars and galaxies, to the migration of birds, to the movement of our own immune system, to the digestive process that is taking place inside us, to the beating of our own heart. Now, when we fully recognize our identity as children of God, created in God's likeness, we realize that we share the DNA of the Father and that it's our job to look after that DNA, looking after our health and well-being by what we think, what we eat and drink, and what we do. And we realize that we're made of love and peace and happiness, and that we're here to share those divine qualities with each other. Those qualities, they're our birthright. We are heirs to all that the Father has. It's written, it is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. To which I would add, if it is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom, then it should be our good pleasure to accept it and to look after it and to cherish it. In the kingdom, the king's word has power. Something declared in a royal decree must be carried out or implemented. So, if you're a child of the king, you are royalty, and your word has power. Speak your word wisely, because with great power comes great responsibility. Furthermore, we are all siblings. Not only is there no separation between God and me, there is no separation between me and you. As Ernest Hemingway put it in For Whom the Bell Tolls, I am thee and thou art me, and all of one is the other. Now, when Jesus used the word Father, he was speaking in Aramaic, and the word he actually used is Aramaic for daddy. So Jesus was experiencing God as a very approachable, very loving presence. And there's a benefit of thinking of God in this personal kind of way. Ernest Holmes tells us we should think of God not only as principle, forever pushing us forward into expression, but as infinite person. If we merely think of an abstract principle and a mathematical law of cause and effect, we shall lose all warmth and color. The universe is more than an inexorable law of cause and effect. Personality cannot emerge from a principle which does not contain the inherent possibility of personality. Holmes went on to point out that God's love is the perfect form of our human love, and that God the Father is the perfect version of our human father. And unlike your biological father, who was bound by the physical laws of time and space, your divine Father is omnipresent, present in his entirety, in all places, at all times, simultaneously. Growing up, did your mother ever say, "Wait till your father gets home"? Well, you don't have to wait for your Heavenly Father to come home. He's already home and always has been. It's you and I that may have stayed out all night. You may recall Jesus' story of the prodigal son. Now, about the only time you ever hear the word prodigal is in connection with this parable. And the basic meaning of prodigal is wasteful, extravagantly wasteful. And the story begins, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Give me the share of the estate that is coming to me." So the father divided his estate between them. Now, the younger son is asking for his share of the estate that he would ordinarily get after his father died. He wanted it right now, while his father still could have had use of those possessions. This was an astonishing request. How many fathers would comply with that request today? Probably not many. And it would have been even more astonishing in the ancient world. In a society that revered parents, it was the equivalent of saying, "Father, I can't wait for you to die. Give me my inheritance now." But there was no argument, just a simple yes. And in the same way, no matter what we ask for in life, God says yes. It may be stupid, it may be destructive, but the law of mind always responds affirmatively to whatever it is we hold in our minds as a sincere belief. The law is forever saying yes. And it's our job, therefore, to ask for the right things, things that will enhance our lives and add value to ourselves and to our world. The story continues that having gotten his inheritance, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in riotous living. Now, riotous living in today's English would be running wild or partying hard. And growing up in a very strict Baptist home, I used to fantasize about going to a far country and engaging in some of that riotous living. Well, what is meant by a far country? It refers to separating ourselves from God, cutting ourselves off from the source of our good. The prodigal son didn't realize that this was what he was doing. He was too busy enjoying the party to care. There were too many shiny, sparkly things competing for his attention to realize what he was doing to himself. And all too often, the things that are out there seem to be more attractive than the things that are in here. And so we spend our money, our time, and our energy chasing after more stuff, and thus miss out on the real gifts that are constantly being offered to us. We are in the far country whenever we choose envy, selfishness, or greed, whenever we cut ourselves off from the good that is always being offered to us. The story continues saying that when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. Now, this was the ultimate degradation for a Jew. It was not only forbidden to eat pork, just to touch a pig was considered unclean. And so it is that when we choose to use our power in negative ways, it's the equivalent of wallowing with the pigs. The story says he longed to fill his stomach with the husks that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. You see what he was doing? He was looking for someone to help him, not realizing that his only help was to be found within. When we cut ourselves off from the supply of good, it's up to us to reconnect with it. No one else can do that for us. And the story tells us that when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will get up and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" The story of the prodigal son teaches us how important it is to use our inheritance and power wisely. The misuse of our freedom traps us in hell, a hell of our own making, because the law of mind is always affirming our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. It's vitally important that we always choose the highest and best for ourselves. To choose anything less is to suffer the consequences of poor choices. And the farther we get from the Father's loving care, the farther we stray from the gifts of light, love, life, power, peace, beauty, and joy. The good news is that the Father is always home, and we can always return home to the good things that are still always being offered to us. No matter how badly we've screwed up our lives, we can always go home and reconnect with our good. So the story says he got up and went to his father. Returning to the Father is a metaphor for awakening to who and what we really are. It's an acknowledgement of and a return to the perfection in which we were born. So we're told he returned to the Father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son and threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quickly, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, put shoes on his feet." There was no condemnation, no probation period, no, "I'll take you back under these conditions." The son had made mistakes, big ones. He'd made a mess of his life. They were totally self-inflicted, but none of that was taken into account. The best robe and the ring are both symbols of the eternal, perfect, whole, and complete, just as we are created, perfect, whole, and complete. And that perfection, that wholeness, that completeness is always ours. And the minute we start paying attention to them, those qualities shine brightly in our lives. The father said, "Let's have a feast and celebrate," and a big party was had, and they ate, drank, and made merry. Now the older son was in the field, and as he drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And the servant said, "Your brother has come home, and because he's safe and sound, your father is called for a celebration." And the son was angry and would not go in. So his father came out and pleaded with him. The son said, "I stayed here. I never transgressed your commands at any time, and you never gave me a party. But as soon as this son of yours comes home, he only wasted half of the estate. You celebrate." The older son failed to realize that his share of the inheritance was still his, that he had enjoyed the blessings of staying at home with his father, that he had nothing to apologize for. He hadn't had to learn about life the hard way. He didn't have to start over. Further, he was invited to the party. He was the one who refused to go in. He was too busy enjoying righteous indignation. You know what righteous indignation is? It's jealousy with a halo. The father said it was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother who is dead is alive again, and who was lost but now is found. And notice that the father didn't say, your brother messed up, but I've forgiven him. No forgiveness was necessary. There was nothing to forgive. There was only love to be shared. You and I are loved by God regardless, because God's love is not conditional. It isn't taken away from us when we mess up. The perfect fatherly love of God is always right there with us, always responding to us affirmatively, always supporting us in whatever phase of life we find ourselves. No matter what, the Father never left home. We may have left home, but the porch light is always on for us, and the Father is waiting for us to return and accept the best that life has to offer. In other words, we can forget all about the old excuse of I'm not good enough. We can drop the idea that others are more worthy of the good of life than we are. We can name and claim our good because we're loved by the Father, and all that the Father has is ours. Well, what if your biological father didn't measure up to the ideal? And what if you unfairly judged your father? And even those of us who had great fathers usually had a relationship that fluctuated and changed throughout life. There's a piece translated from a Dutch magazine which makes the point. 4 years old, my daddy can do anything. 7 years old, my daddy knows a lot, a whole lot. 8 years old, my father doesn't know quite everything. 12 years old, oh well, naturally dad doesn't know that either. 14 years old, father, he's hopelessly old-fashioned. 21 years old, oh, that man, he is so out of date. 25 years old, he knows a little bit about it. 30 years old, I must find out what dad thinks. 35 years old, before we decide, let's get dad's idea first. 50 years old, wonder what dad would have thought about that. 60 years old, my dad knew everything. 65 years old, I only wish I could talk it over with Dad once more. A quote by Mark Twain makes the same point much more succinctly. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. Yes, our opinions of our fathers change over time, and so do our opinions about God. And regardless of how our opinions about good old dad may have changed as we changed, we know that our Abba, or Heavenly Father, does not change depending upon conditions, what we've done or what we haven't done. In the parable, Jesus depicts the Father as the wise, generous, non-judgmental, and totally unconditionally loving Father that you and I would be grateful to have. And although we might settle for less, the Heavenly Father won't. He sees us as the glorious beings we are created to be. Because God is everything, there's nothing for God to change into. And yet, just as our opinions of our biological father may have changed, so too can our conception of God. And with time, our appreciation of the Heavenly Father grows, and as it does, our world changes for the better. So this Father's Day, honor your earthly father, whether he's here physically or in memory only. Honor new dads, old dads, granddads, dads-in-laws, stepdads, serious dads, goofy dads. There must be a million fatherly types out there. And without a doubt, there are at least that many reasons to honor them on this day. And then, honor the Father within. Get up close and personal with the divine. If you're not as close to God as you used to be, who moved? God is the Father who's always home. Return home and enjoy the blessings that are yours because your Father loves you beyond your wildest dreams. Happy Father's Day.